Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for an exciting episode of the Freight 360 podcast. We're up to 186, and if you are watching us on YouTube, me and Ben here together.
In person.
You'll be getting to see this again next week as well. So we got a fun one today. We've got some listener Q&A, and we'll get into that in a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services. Looking to quickly identify qualified sales prospects? Looking to develop trusted, sustainable business partnerships? Look no further. The Lumber Blue Book is an online directory and credit resource for the lumber and forest products industry, covering mills, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Their database of over 23,000 lumber companies can be searched and segmented to develop sales and marketing campaigns. Members receive access to real-time credit and business information for companies throughout the industry. To learn more, go to lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today. That's lumberbluebook.com. And don't forget about Produce Blue Book as well. Check out the show notes for a quick link to check out both those companies. Well, hey, we got an awesome episode today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the KPIs and metrics that brokerages use to track overall performance, especially when it comes to new employees at their company. At the same time, just overall the health and sustainability of the brokerage. So first, a little sports talk. I got to say, after last week's episode with Desmond Clark, I've had people reaching out to me left and right. They loved it, man.
It was a good show.
It was a lot of fun.
I enjoyed doing it.
So I didn't realize. So I was trying to figure out where he lives. And he's in Central Florida, I think, right?
He mentioned he grew up, I think, by Tampa and then came back, but I don't think he stated specifically where.
Okay. I was going to say, while I'm down here the next couple weeks, I should have tried to grab lunch or something with him. But had a fun episode. If you guys didn't tune in to episode 185, check it out. We tell the story of Desmond Clark, former NFL tight end. Got to the Super Bowl with the Chicago Bears, and he's used our material and our content not only to learn himself about this industry, but it's the training material for his employees now.
Yeah,
so
literally for their company.
Love to see that come full circle. So in other sports news, we did just finish up March Madness. What do you think, man? FAU and Miami both did not make it.
I know. And clearly, living in South Florida, I've got some love for the colleges around here, but FAU is literally where I live. I would say.
Is it in Boca?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 2 blocks from my house. I get my MRIs and stuff done, at their campus. So, the kids, the community, everybody was fired up. We had a little watch party at the pool. Really disheartening. Not that they just lost, but how they lost. Basically have the lead they did have the lead the entire second half. And they
all the way till the end of the game, right?
Yeah. In the last 6, handful of seconds. And just how they lost was super disheartening. But again, hey, UConn took it. UConn, back to when I was in college, they were in the Big East. I was, went to Pitt, so, I'm no stranger to watching UConn dominate college basketball.
They've been a force of nature when it comes to college basketball for a very long time. So I think as soon as we saw that it was UConn, San Diego State, I was like, they don't stand a chance. Yeah, UConn's going to take it. And I think they won by was it 15 or actually they might have got closer at the end there. Maybe 4 or 5. No, I think it was 15.
Yeah, because I think the spread was 5 or 7 at different points throughout the day. I don't know what the actual final.
I had my brother put in an over bet for me because you can't do any sports betting in Florida. Not that we condone or promote gambling by any means on this channel, but I like to dabble here and there.
76.59 by the way.
Okay, so there you go. 16-point spread what the final gap there was. I took over 130. I think it went 135 or something like that. So, or what is that?
135.
135. Yep. So that's always fun. In other sports, it's Masters weekend coming up here, right? We're getting to the fun time of the golf season here. I was seeing some of the stats yesterday on, guys in golf that have had how many green jackets they've won. I didn't realize Tiger's got 6.
Yeah.
5 or 6. That's insane. Let me ask you this too, because I saw Phil Mickelson is playing. Is this one of those tournaments where it's even if you're on the LIV tour, you can participate? Is it its own independent
Well,
tournament?
The PGA, and again, I could be wrong, but the PGA, to my best of my knowledge, runs 2 of the majors. They run or are affiliated, I think, with maybe not the U.S. Open.
I think
but
2 of the 4 they can still play in.
Yeah, the PGA definitely is obviously a PGA event. You have the Masters, which isn't. It's run by Augusta. Then
probably the British Open or the Open.
Yeah, the Open. So you have the U.S. Open and the British Open or the Open. Because I know there were articles where basically, the British Open is going to allow Cam, because he's the defending title. Yep. He's going to be able to play. So I think the LIV players are going to be able to play in those 2 majors, but I don't necessarily think they will be for the other 2.
Okay. Interesting.
But there was a funny article. There was a quote from Greg Norman's, because he's like heading the LIV team, and they said
he's like the face of LIV. Yeah.
They're like, hey, did you what do you got on your plans for the Masters? He's like, oh, funny thing was this year I didn't even get an invitation. He said last year I got a greens pass, and that was about it. But as a former major winner at Augusta, you'd think I'd at least got an invite.
Yeah,
but apparently not so much.
What I have enjoyed is I've been watching the Full Swing documentary, like the mini series on Netflix, and I think there's 8 episodes in this first season, and I'm through like 5 or 6, and it is really cool to see, because I think it was filmed in like 21 and 22, and it's showing like that transition where guys they're taking big amounts of money to go to LIV. And you hear them stand at the podium at a tournament being asked, like, are you going to make the switch? And they're like, we'll see. And then they do, like, the next episode. So, like, the big ones, like Brooks Koepka got a big payout to go there. Obviously, Phil Mickelson, Cam Smith, right?
Yeah, huge amounts of money. I mean, like, obscene numbers.
Yeah.
Sergio.
Yep.
Ian Poulter, a couple of the other.
He's fun. Like that. Yeah. Did you watch the episode with him?
I did.
I think it's like the second one.
Yep.
He's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy too. I can't remember his name. He's like, someone's got to be the 70th best golfer in the league or something like that.
And I can't remember the guy's
name. He was like drinking White Claws at the turn.
I can picture his face, but I can't remember his name right now.
Funny. Really cool just to see the behind the scenes stuff though with
good
golf.
Series.
So, you got anything else on sports before we get into it? So let's give a shout out to our friends over at DAT, and then we're going to talk some good stuff today.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane, so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Check out the show notes for a free month of DAT1.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to get to some listener Q&A, but the main one I want to talk about here, we got an email in asking about KPI. So if you don't know what a KPI is, it's a key performance indicator. And
what does that mean? Break that down in layman's terms.
Okay.
What is a key performance indicator?
Let's explain it to a 5th grader. Break it down Barney style. So it's basically a stat or a metric within a business or a company that helps you identify sort of where you are compared to a benchmark. So, for example, we could say that a KPI could be your margin percentage or your total sales. Or if you want to get creative, we could say a KPI for a new broker is the number of calls you're making every single day, the number of follow-ups, the number of customers that you're converting, the percentage of customers that you convert from prospect to an actual profitable customer, the number of minutes you spend on the phone each day. These are all examples. It's a measurable metric that allows us to compare where we're at to whatever a goal might be or an industry benchmark, anything like that.
I want to break these into 2 categories too, I think, which are helpful. And I think these are helpful for anybody managing a team or looking at them for themselves. One category is you've got a key performance indicator or a KPI of something that is a result of something you did. So somewhere along the line, you did something, and then this is a result. But it isn't necessarily like a direct controllable, we'll call it.
Sure.
And then you have your other category, which is things you actually can control on a daily basis. And a good example of that is if you look at key performance indicators that are just how much money did you make this month, that's not really anything anybody can change on any given day, right? These are things that need to be done over time. And I think one of the biggest things where companies can make errors is by holding people accountable to things they can't necessarily change in the short run.
Yes.
Which is just frustrating. But we'll get into that. Let's just, after that little categorization, we kind of dig into what some of them are and why.
I think it's important to point out there too, is that, like, to break it down even further, you can control the number of times that you dial a phone every single day, but you cannot control how many loads your customer decided to tender to you.
Correct.
You can influence it, but it's not something that you're. So if your boss says you have to move more loads, well, you can't just go get more loads and guarantee it. You have to put in the activity and plant the seeds to then, I guess it would be to influence what that outcome of that other metric would be.
And I think another simple way to look at that is the things you influence have two variables. The thing you're doing, just like you said, you're having effective conversations. You're following up. You're calling this person. You're building rapport, right? But the thing you can't control is how much time needs to pass before that relationship is established, right?
Yes.
In some instances, that person could have a huge need that had nothing to do with you, and that came up in your second or third conversation. And all of a sudden, you're off to the races with a big win. In some instances, that person doesn't happen to have a need for 1,000 different reasons for maybe 6 months. Now, you could have done everything you still were doing correctly, accurately, effectively, but there's just an aspect that you're just never going to be able to have control over. Right? And I think
that's exactly true.
Where companies really go wrong is when they just, use the stick to motivate somebody, basically do this or you don't have a job. But yet, like, nobody can control the amount of people that say yes, to your point. I can call 100 people every day, but I can't make 30 or 40 of them answer the phone, be in a good mood, have a need, connect with me, and want to move forward.
So that brings up a good point too. And we've talked about leadership and like sales managers and just team leaders in general. We've talked about this before, that when you're setting goals, it should be a group choice. You shouldn't be dictating what the goals are. You should be saying, hey, based on where you're at, what do you think your goal is going to be this year that you'll realistically hit? Now, on top of that, whether it's because we're in a results-driven organization or industry, right? If we do well, we move a lot of freight at a good profit, there's going to be a lot of money made and good commissions. So for both the folks that are succeeding and those that are underperforming, you should be looking at, as a leader, right? And if you're not the leader, have your leader have this conversation with you. Look at why, right? Why did I not succeed? But more importantly, for the folks that are succeeding, and they don't have this analysis, why did you succeed so well? Why did you go above and beyond what you had projected for this month or this quarter? Was it something different about those inputs, the calls you made, the follow-ups, the types of follow-ups? Did you do a customer visit in person? Did you have a terrible situation that happened that you were kind of like the knight in shining armor that fixed it? Is that what led to a better relationship and more business? You have to look at what's causing the outcome for all of these. So just a tip there for anyone in leadership is ask why. Right? Figure out what it is that causes just not miraculously, we had a great month. Like, for example, last summer, right, 2022, and even 2021, people were having record profits, record sales, and they're like, we're killing it. We must be doing a good job. Well, prices just went up. Right? And demand went up. So, like, naturally, anybody could have done a good job. And there was a false sense of like crushing it for the wrong reasons the last couple of years.
False sense of confidence.
Yes.
Everybody thought they were the king of the world because there was such a high demand for the services our industry offered, right? And hey, that's not a bad thing. You want to encourage confidence, but again, you don't want false confidence.
Yes.
You don't want confidence that is based on something that you had absolutely no control over, right?
Exactly.
So one of the most important things, whether it's a manager or just an agent that is in the industry, right, listening to this, is thinking about what were the things that you did that actually led to the outcome, right? Like, there was one, and I spent a lot of time with this early in my career, was genuinely kind of concerned and worried. Am I good at this or am I just lucky, right? And it's really hard to tell. It's a good
question, though, based on the time you come into the industry, right?
Yeah, because some of the things happened at the right time in the right moment, or even just my first customer I always kept going back to was like 2,100 phone calls I think I counted before I got that big customer, and it's like, if that person didn't pick up the phone, would I have needed to make another 2,100? Would I have lost my job before I got the next big yes? Because again, it only took one to really make it take off. It didn't take, 10% of everything I did every day to eventually build up to that. It's like in our industry, you don't need a high batting average. Honestly, you can make a shitload of money hitting a home run every sixth game, right?
Yes.
And striking out everything in between. So when you're trying to assess what you did well, what's going to help you do well again, I always thought there's that, and I can't remember the actual quote, but it's like, if you do it once, you're lucky. If you do it 3 times, you're good. 2 times, you're still kind of in the middle. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But unpacking that, I think, is really what's important to understanding, because the reality is you don't want to just hit home runs, because again, then you have huge swings in your sales career where it's like you're on top of the world and everything's right. And then when everything isn't going right, you feel like, you're about to leave this career that you thought you loved to go do anything other than this, right?
Yep.
And it's exhausting going through those ups and downs. So it's like, what can we do to keep the steady incline instead of the wild swings of, I'm going to be a millionaire, I'm going to be bankrupt, I'm going to be a millionaire, I'm going to be bankrupt.
So I had I think it was a boss of mine, someone in leadership years ago that told me that your sales pipeline and your customer base should be a well-balanced portfolio the same way that a retirement account is looked at, right? Meaning that you don't just have a bunch of single stocks that you think are going to go hit it out of the park, and one day you're up 400%, and the next day you're down 300%. It should be a balanced and mixed across the board of all that. It's consistency, and it helps you take those smaller ones and grow them over time, but also nourish the relationship with some of those big hitters.
Here's a real quick litmus test. And that's one of the first things we do with any of the clients we work at is, hey, what do your customers look like? What does your business look like? The most important question isn't really those 2 things. It's the third question. What does the pipeline look like?
Yes.
What does what is coming down the literal and figurative pipe into your business look like? And guess what? If there isn't one, when we asked this question a year ago and a year and a half ago, rhetorically to the audience, what does your pipeline look like? The answer we got to that was, I don't have enough time. We can't get to that.
Yeah, we're just moving loads right now.
We're just moving loads. Yeah. We're just printing money. We don't have time to do these. Well, again,
it will dry up.
The market is a cycle. It's a circle. So no matter where you are, you end up where you were at some point in time, no matter how good things are. And guess what? All those people that ignored, and it's not our advice, it's just genuine, industry advice across sales.
Yeah, I call them just standard best practices.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
So the people that ignored those are the ones that either don't have jobs or don't have books or are running frantically trying to get whatever load anyone will get to them just to put something up on the board. And the reality is you can't build a career on that or a sustainable income either.
I saw a funny meme for anyone out there that follows Freight Caviar. They have a lot of funny memes on Instagram and Facebook. And there was one recently that shows the circle, and it showed business is good. Or people join the trucking industry. Business is bad. People go out of business. Business is good. People get it's just the inevitable cycle. This is what happens. But based on when you join. And I think when I got into it, I probably didn't know what the hell was going on at the time. I was still trying to figure it out. But I got into it in 2014, and there was big talk of ELD around that time, and it ended up going into play, 2 or 3 years later. But I was able to see that entire market cycle in the first couple of years that I was there, and then I saw it repeat again, and then again during COVID. So people can get into it, and if you come in during the peak time, you have that false sense of confidence. Then you get Desmond. We talked about them last week. He came in at the hard time.
The bottom.
And he's you asked him, and he's like, I didn't care. Did not care that it was a bad time for the market. I'm going to go ahead and do what I have to do to make things work. And that is awesome, because if you don't have that mindset of how to handle business when business is not easy, then you're never going to make it through that next cycle.
I think one of the most valuable things for people getting into business, and I mean that generally, especially freight brokerage, is ignorance. Because when you don't know what you don't know, you don't have the ability to blame what you're not doing correctly on it.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is hey, everybody that kind of understands it goes, well, it's too shitty to make prospecting calls right now. No one needs my help. I'm not going to make it. And they justify inaction, right? They use that to rationalize not doing the hard thing that we know you need to do in any business, right?
Yes.
Building a pipeline so that you've got more customers, right? But the people that come into it and don't know the difference in a market cycle, they're like, Well, I just got to do the things that I know to build a business. Ignore everything else. Because guess what? You can't influence them anyway. You can't influence the market. You're not going to change it. You won't move it. So if you want to participate, what is the point on focusing on it? Because it doesn't do you any good or any benefit whatsoever.
That I can't agree with you more. So let's take a look at some of the actual KPIs. There's a lot out there. We're not going to be able to cover every single one of them in just one episode, but I'm gonna look at some of the results. We'll break it up, right? We'll do the results and then we'll look at the input. So some of the first KPIs that I was taught to look at were the profit per load. Again, that's not your sales or revenue per load. It's your profit per load, and then the profit margin percentage, right? Your margin percentage.
Yep.
And I want to take a second to talk about that because people oftentimes talk about their total revenue, their total sales numbers, and at the end of the day, in our industry, that does not matter. Actually, there's possibly an inverse correlation, right?
Yes.
The higher that sales number is, if your profit's not keeping up with it, the bigger burden and stress that puts on you as the quote unquote bank, right? You have to cash flow the entire transaction. So great. If you do $2 million a year in sales, well, if you only made $100,000, you're operating at a 5% margin. That is extremely hard to sustain. You're becoming a very, very cheap bank for a lot of people.
Exactly.
So I always look at profit. So the kind of the benchmarks that we've talked about are 15% is kind of an industry standard average, and that could flux up and down depending on how things are going in your customer's life cycle and where you are as a new broker or a veteran broker. But that sales number, right? Let's look at now versus a year ago, that sales number could be twice as high last year just because rates were higher, not because your load count went up.
And I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, not only are we seeing that with the people and the businesses we work in, but we're also seeing it across the industry. Like Dean and some of the folks at DAT were talking about this last week, is that most brokerages are seeing lower load volume, but higher margins.
Yep.
Because again, rates are being pushed down. So they're seeing what would look like more profit for less work.
Yes.
But the reality is like, that's just an indicator that things aren't going in the right direction because you want to keep increasing the amount of business you're doing. But you've got to keep maintaining those profit margins. Otherwise, you're going to sink yourself.
Yep.
Just chasing the sales numbers isn't chasing the right numbers.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of some of the actual metrics that I have seen and used in the past. So in a down market, like similar to now, I remember if you go back probably 5 years or whenever the last time we had a slow market before the last big boom, I think it was like $280 to $290, or just under $300 a load margin per load was where we saw things. I looked at it with you, I think a year ago, maybe. I looked at my company and the group of guys and gals we got there, and we were at like 450. It had nothing to do with being more like our margin percentage being higher. It was just that the price tag on every load was higher. So we still maintained about 15% margin on average, but 15% of a bigger dollar amount is more profit per load.
So just for the audience out there, for round numbers, right? If the market is at, $2 a mile and jumps up 50% to $3 a mile. So your load that you were making, we'll even say 15% on 1,000 is now 15% on 1,500, right?
Yep.
So you're literally increasing the basis by 50% and nobody did anything. That's just the market moved in that direction, which benefited everybody in it.
Yes. You're absolutely, I guess who paid the price tag on it was every consumer out there, right?
We all did too.
We all did as well. But it just happens to be, if you're in the logistics realm, it kind of balanced out if you're a commission-based person.
Yeah.
But I think that your profit per load, even though it'll fluctuate based on the market, it's a good metric to track. And the reason I say that is because every brokerage, and it's going to be different for everybody, you're going to have a break-even point, right? And that could be $30. Like, you have to look at what your total fixed costs are and divide that over
loads run.
Yeah, the total loads you run, and you could find out that for every load that we run, we needed to make at least $30 to break even, or at least $60. And it's going to be different depending on how you're structured, who's getting paid what, and what your overhead and fixed costs are. But that's why it's important to track it.
And I think, again, I just want to break down for anyone out there that wants to know what that number is. And everybody that runs their own business should know this, whether it's an agent or an entire brokerage, is take your fixed costs, not your variable costs. So every cost, every bill that you've got to pay, whether you run 0 loads or 1,000 loads.
Electric, technology fees, heat, air conditioning, insurance, all that stuff.
All of the bills, your load boards, everything you got to pay, even if you don't move a dollar or load, right? Anything, your insurance, all those things. Divide that by the amount of loads you run over that period of time. So if you pick a 30-day period, what were those bills per month? How many loads did you run that month? If you've been running your brokerage for a few years, do it on a year and a month. Now you've got two numbers you can look at to look at what kind of where you are in the season, because that is the number that you need to exceed every time you run a load to not lose money. Like that is your break even point. Well, you technically need your variable costs in there as well, but at the very least, you need a benchmark. Right.
And the reason for that is that's when, if you're building out a team, you could tell them like, hey, we understand you're going to have loads that you take a loss on or break even, but you should at a minimum be trying to make X amount of dollars. That's that consider that zero. And what a lot of companies will do too is when they pay commission out to a sales rep, one of their W-2 brokers or whatever, they might have a minimum. Like if we don't make $50 or $60 on this load, there's no commission eligible for you on this. And here's why.
This is the reason why we just outlined.
And if you're going to do that, I think that's a fair business practice, but you should be explaining to your team members why it is that there's a minimum profit on each load. Some companies choose to just say, hey, we'll look at all your total business for the month and pay you commission on it, and that can be fine too. But that's why we look at that profit per load. Revenue per load, I don't really care about as much, but the margin percentage is extremely important, and here's why as well. So we said 15% on average. You get some brokers that come in, and they're starting off at like 6-7% margin, and they're paying like 3% in factoring fees. You just ate up half of your profit just in factoring. Before you've even paid the light bill, your insurance bill, your load boards, TMS, any of that. So that margin percentage, I've always said double digits is healthy. If you can get to 10 or higher, and then from there, try to ramp yourself up.
And I think what's going to be helpful, we were talking about this morning, give some round numbers for what I would just say a healthy brokerage looks like for profit margins. So like if you own the whole company, what would you say industry average is off of sales? And what would you say it is off gross profit?
I would say off of sales, probably 3 to 5%, and I've seen it vary.
So again, that's if you're doing $1 million through your entire company in total sales, right? At the end of the year, you should be looking to make on a very good run brokerage 5, maybe 6%. On a poorly run brokerage, probably 3 or less.
Yeah, well, and it's going to change too. So the bigger the company, the lower that percentage. So like $1 million is probably a bad example, because if you're $1 million brokerage, you're probably just yourself. Yes. So you're not paying employees. You're not paying, you know what I mean? So let's say you did $10 million, okay? And you've got a team of 4 or 5 people. So after you've paid out everyone's salaries, commissions, and all your expenses, you could expect to be earning $300,000 to $500,000 is what we're saying in that case. That's what the company would net afterward. That would be what I consider as healthy. So if you've got 2 owners, split it down the middle. If you have just yourself, that's all. That's what you would pay taxes on at the end of the day. So different size company or different business model companies are going to have different types. You might have the same number, like 3 to 5%, but it's going to be paid out differently. All those other expenses, right? So, for example, agent-based companies tend to pay out a lot of money in commission to their agents, but they have less money being spent on other stuff like training, turnover of employees, things like that. Whereas you look at a big box brokerage that might hire 20 people in each class or 50 people in each class, and they have high turnover, they have a lot of money spent on paying salaries to reps that never end up producing and being profitable for the company.
Equipment, office space, management,
sales management, all of that, right? That whole training process. So you might pay less commission out and less salary to your employees, but you've got a lot of other expense paid out in other things to be able to sustain that model.
So again, and I just want to expand on this. I know it's not on KPIs, but I think it's helpful because we get this question a lot, is what does it look like to be in the agent side versus this? And this is the fundamental difference. If you go work at a big box, you'll get a small salary, call it 45 grand. You'll make commission on 20 to 25%, but you are going to be surrounded by a lot of other people learning that aren't going to succeed. So for every 10, 8 aren't going to make it. That cost is getting rolled into there. You get the manager overseeing all the people that aren't profitable and are just learning and
the
won't
trainers
make it. The trainers, every one of those computers, every one of those phone lines, all the software for all of them, the air conditioning in the office to hold all that. Because again, industry average, like, out of 8 people or 10 people you hire, 8 probably aren't going to make it, 8 or 9.
Yep.
So all of those costs go into why you typically get better training and better exposure quicker, but you get much less profit. You're making 20, 25% on your customers.
Yes.
Agent model, you're getting no training, no computers, no manager, nobody overseeing anything. You get basically back office support for things, but you've got to go and do all of these other things yourself in addition to having no salary and no safety net if you don't succeed. That's why you're getting the 50 to 70%.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. Exactly.
Exactly.
So other KPIs, and I'll just kind of spit these off. So I look at, not saying that I'm not going to put them in any particular order, but these are a lot of the metrics that companies will track and look at the trend lines over time. Load count. I already mentioned, we've talked about the revenue per load, profit per load, margin percentage, customer days to pay. And I'll take a quick second on this, because if a customer has a lower margin or a lower profit per load, but they're paying their bills very fast, that could still be beneficial to your cash flow. But if they're bad on all of them, like low margin per load, low percentage, and they're slow to pay, it's not a good customer. Check out, we have another episode, I think it was like a year and a half ago, where we talked about when to fire a customer. Those are like indicators of a bad customer.
Quick little secret, usually the ones that are very long to pay usually are the cheapest and lowest margin, so they're usually bad for more than one reason.
And they're usually easy to get as a customer. That's
usually
why.
Very easy. And you just hang on to them forever because you're like, I've been working with this guy forever, but he pays peanuts and he never pays his bills. But hey.
Yes. Whereas on the contrary, if they've got high margin and high margin percentage, you can kind of handle someone that's paying a little bit slower than you're paying carriers, because you know that the juice is worth the squeeze at the end of the day. Other metrics. So let's look at the inputs. Sales calls, talk time, like the number of minutes you spend a day, how many times you are following up with a prospect on average. Are you getting to that 8 to 12 contacts, or are you giving up after 3? These are good ways to look at a new employee and how they're actually prospecting. How many people are in their pipeline at the moment? How often how often are they reaching out to a prospect? Is it every 2 weeks? Is it every 2 months? Those are different things to look at. So
I'll add one thing to that. And another easy kind of simple way to look at that is take your total number of prospects, right? And you always want to be looking, if you're a manager at your sales reps, are their prospects falling out and being added to it?
Yes.
If that's not happening, they're not doing an effective job at working their prospects through the sales cycle. Yep. If it's just some static number of the same number of companies they talk to every week of every month, and they're just calling and saying, just checking in, do you got any loads for me? They're not really making progress at qualifying, finding the ones that are becoming better, because over time, either opportunities increase or they stay the same or they decrease. You want to be not in the middle of the road, either disqualifying and then getting them out because there's not a good reason to work with them and you don't want to waste your time, or saying, hey, I found another reason why there's value that I didn't understand here that's worth me pursuing.
Yep.
They got to either be in one category, so they got to be falling out and being added to it, honestly, weekly. Like, it shouldn't be a static number.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think even daily in certain instances, people are doing that. So good stuff. All right. We got some more listener Q&A to get to here in a bit. Yeah. So are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They are industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies, with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions they have to offer your brokerage or agency. I drove by near their office yesterday down in Coral Springs. Good stuff. All right, first, we got 3 more questions here. How do I report a bad carrier? Well, I'll hit on a couple things. Use your internal system, absolutely, if you're at a company that has more than one person.
First off, let's just start there. If you don't have one, you should have one. And even if you don't spend or want to spend any money, create an Excel sheet or a Google Sheets for free and put in the MCs, the carrier name, the email address, and the phone number, and why you don't want to work with them again.
Yep. Too easy. External sources. Carrier 411. leaving a review on Google, leaving a review on DAT.
Freight Guard.
Freight Guards, that's on Carrier 411, right?
Okay.
You can go to the FMCSA website. We talked about this in the past. There's a way to report fraud. I personally use GoHighway.com, or Highway, used to be called Carrier Lists. They have a reporting tool there as well. So tons of stuff out there. I know there's a lot of carrier vetting tools, and they typically tend to have some sort of reporting metric about double brokerage, held load hostage, fell off load, all that stuff. But it's really important to track those metrics. I love the whole carrier fall off percentage because you know how reliable or unreliable a carrier might be once you get a rate count over. Next question here. As a small carrier, is it easier to use a good broker or a dispatch service to get consistent loads? I think there's value in using both. I think consistency is probably going to come from your brokers who can go bid on like an RFP or a bid package. What do you think?
It's kind of a hard question to answer because a good dispatcher should have good relationships with good brokers.
Yes.
So if you get a good dispatcher, they likely have the first thing you mentioned. And I only say that from like personal experience. Like the dispatch services I've used throughout my career, like that was the value. They worked with me, but to be honest, the one I worked with in Chicago the most, her name was Felicia. She had like 9 of her family members all had small trucking companies, and she was able to pool capacity when we needed to. And I was able to hand that off to other people when they needed to. So, I mean, they do add value when they're actually adding value. But
Well, I think the same thing goes. There's good brokers, bad brokers, good dispatchers, bad dispatchers, good carriers, bad carriers, good customers, bad customers.
Yeah.
There's good and bad, everywhere.
And to be honest, a dispatch service is more focused on adding value to the carrier side, where a broker, I would say, is probably more focused on adding value to the shipper side.
Yes.
Just because of the way they're structured.
I would agree. All right, lastly here, how well does ChatGPT know our industry? It's been such a hot topic, people talking about AI and GPT and whatnot. So I'll tell you, I played around with GPT 3.5 when it was first rolled out, like back in November, December of last year. And it knew some basic stuff, but it also was limited in the fact that it was only trained up until like 2 years ago. So it had no idea about where the freight market was now.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that I think that, and I'll be curious to hear your input, I think AI in general is going to serve a purpose in our industry. I don't think it's totally there yet, but I have high hopes that it's going to help enhance those of us that are going to embrace tech to use it to really benefit customers in the long term. But I think I'm excited to see where it's going to go. I don't think it's totally there yet. It's got a lot of learning to do and a lot of application, but basic knowledge about freight broker, and it's trained on like Wikipedia and whatnot, so it'll tell you the limited information that's out there on Wikipedia on us.
And I think that's the case. Like the feel I got, and I've done a lot of time referencing stuff that we've put together and seeing what it says and just playing around to see how accurate I felt it was. It really does a good job of summarizing, I think, what's out there historically. So again, you really get the feel that what it's doing is understanding blog posts and company articles that have been written throughout really the history of the internet up until 2-3 years ago.
Yep.
What I didn't feel it did a good job was being able to tell me nuanced differences, how to look at rates in certain situations. Like the things that we run into in our job on a day-to-day basis, it really doesn't have the context to understand some of those things because I don't think it had enough. There was enough out there for it to train on to begin with.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. The release isn't out, but they released what is coming down the pipeline from it. And they've already released plugins that will connect it directly to the live internet. So
that's exciting.
Not theoretically, they're creating, the way I've heard it described is very similar to the App Store, where you're going to be able to now go in, use chat as an interface instead of Google. And a company like, we'll say kayak.com for like booking flights and vacations will have a plugin so that ChatGPT can understand, just like somebody that did really well on, the SATs. Somebody very bright can say, okay, Nate, well, you and your wife are going to go on vacation to Florida next April. Well, I know your wife is a vegan. She tends to like to eat these restaurants. The place where you like to eat might not have the right availability. We booked you 2 nights here. We got you some reservations here. We found a good flight, but since you have 2 kids, we made sure we had all your seats together. Doing things that like trying to have Google and do a transaction aren't able to do because it can't understand you conversationally. But I think that's really where it's going to be.
My wife better never be vegan. Let's just draw the line there.
Fair enough.
No hate on any of the vegans out there. I got a good freight broker buddy of mine that is a vegan.
But again, I think it's good. I think it's good for regulations. It's good for understanding, I think, some rules and industry standards. I don't think it's very effective at explaining some of the things and the nuances of how our industry actually works.
I think what it will do a good job at is there are business analysts that are hired as employees of companies to look at historical trends on data that's within their company or available out in the free market. I think it will do a good job at running analysis on that. Like, so for example, DAT has RateCast, which can help predict future rates the next 7 days. I think if you can machine train or machine learning, whatever it's called, on a big set of data, you'll probably be able to use AI to more accurately predict and project future rates, what capacity will and will not look like, things like that. But it's only as good as the data that it's being fed.
Correct.
And a lot of companies out there tend to hold their data close.
They're not going to. That's their proprietary. That's their value. Like they're not just going to hand this over.
But I think companies like DAT, who they have access to data on factoring of actual loads, so they know what was paid, who it was paid to, what the margin was, where it was picking up, going, what kind of equipment type. They know that. They also have access to all the company's search history, posting history, all that stuff. And they've already done a good job at giving an analysis through a lot of their tools like RateCast, Lane Maker, stuff like that, RateView. But I think this added level of, processing of big amounts of data sets, I think that's where it's going to be really exciting. It'll never replace personal relationships, in my opinion.
Do you know what I think it's going to do? I think it's going to do pretty effectively, pretty quickly, is check calls via text messages.
Yes.
To be able to go back and forth with drivers and have conversations about what they're actually saying. Not just like, hey, where are you? What's your last mile marker, your ETA? I think it can do this. I think someone's going to be able to plug in pretty quickly once it's released onto the back of a TMS that's going to be able to send text messages to drivers based on criteria and just say, hey, check out every driver 3 hours before pickup time. Ask where they are, make sure they're okay, check in on them.
Make sure they've got good hours, good sleep, all that stuff.
And they're not going to realize that they're not talking to the person. They're going to think they're talking to a person. And again, that's the point. Hey, make it more efficient on both sides. And I think that's really going to be some of the first use cases.
We all know when we've gotten a robo text, a robo call, even a robo chatbot on a website, we can tell. But the closer we get to them developing technology that feels more human, I think it's going to be a game changer. So. Well, good stuff. Good questions. Great episode. We'll be in person again next week. This time, we're currently in Palm Beach, and we'll be down in Boca Raton, right?
Yeah, like 200 yards from the ocean right now.
Yeah, we are.
Boca next week. So.
Yes, we will.
Before we wrap up, for our audience, our content isn't free, right? It isn't. We put all this work into this every week, and we only ask that you do one thing in return, right? The gentleman's agreement, or what do they call it in MFM? I like that. They're like the gentleman's agreement or the lady's understanding, which is we're not there to sit behind you and see you do this. We're just going to expect that you do because everyone else is doing it, which is go onto YouTube, click the subscribe button. If you're on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you're listening to it, subscribe and write a review. That's all we need in return for
comment on YouTube as well.
Throw a comment out there. Greatly appreciate it. It helps us get what we need to give you more of what you guys ask us for.
Helps the algorithm, helps us reach more people, and it's great stuff. And also, obviously, if you're going to use any of our affiliate products, use the link that we've got on our website and in the show notes.
So it'll save you money and
helps out your
support
boys.
Back to us.
Good stuff. I forgot in sports. I went to see the Buffalo Sabres played on here in
Panthers.
Yeah, they played the Panthers. And is it
I think it's
Sunrise?
BBC. I thought it's BBC. It's Sunrise, Florida.
It's FLA Live Arena is what the name of the arena is. Or
change it. I thought it used to be like it was a bank.
I don't know. But the Sabres lost 2-1. So I have yet to see a Buffalo sports team win on the road. I've seen the Bills on the road, Sabres on the road.
What's important is you support them.
But I will say the arena was like 25% Buffalo fans. There was there might have been more Bills gear than there was actually hockey gear, but it is also like spring break time here.
It is Palm Beach, Florida, and there are probably more people from New York per capita in Palm Beach than probably anywhere else than Florida.
Yeah, so Good stuff. Any final thoughts here, Ben?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.